I'm 87 years old, and this is the first time I've said this out loud to anyone who wasn't already gone. I've lived long enough to watch my hands thin, my friends disappear. My name slowly stopped meaning anything outside a few medical charts, and now sitting here in the quiet, I finally understand something that followed me my entire life without ever raising its voice. Fear didn't scream at me. It didn't shove me off a cliff. It just stood beside me, patient and reasonable, and whispered that there was no hurry, that tomorrow would be safer, that waiting was wiser. And I listened. I didn't lose my life in one terrible mistake. I gave it away slowly, one cautious decision at a time. I'm telling you this from the far end of things, the end where time doesn't feel abstract anymore, where weeks don't stack neatly into years, and years don't pretend to be endless. At 87, the future is no longer a place I plan for. It's a thin strip of light I walk toward carefully. I don't say this to be dramatic. It's just how it is. When you reach this age, the past gets loud. Not in a chaotic way, in a steady, unavoidable way. It sits with you when the house is quiet. It shows up when you wake before dawn and can't fall back asleep. When I look back, I don't see a reckless man. I see a careful one. That's what makes this harder to admit. I did what made sense. I chose stability. I chose to not rock the boat. I chose the path that looked respectable and safe from the outside. I worked steadily. I paid my bills. I showed up. People would have called me responsible, reliable, sensible. And I believed that meant I was doing life correctly. In my 20s and 30s, fear wore a very reasonable face. It sounded like planning, like maturity, like not being foolish. I told myself I'd speak up later. I'd take the risk once things were more secure. I'd say what I felt when the timing was right. I wasn't avoiding life, I thought. I was preparing for it. I remember small, ordinary moments. Sitting at a kitchen table, nodding through a conversation I didn't agree with, telling myself it wasn't worth the tension, standing in a doorway with my coat on, almost saying something important, then deciding it could wait until tomorrow. Watching opportunities pass, not because I didn't want them, but because wanting them felt dangerous. Fear never asked me to stop living. It only asked me to delay. And delay is hard to recognize as loss when you're young. It feels temporary, sensible, harmless. The strange thing is, I didn't feel unhappy back then. That's another truth that took decades to understand. You don't need to be miserable to be slowly erasing yourself. You can function. You can smile. You can even feel proud sometimes. The damage doesn't announce itself. It accumulates quietly like dust on furniture you never move. I didn't know I was shrinking my life. I thought I was protecting it. Now, from where I sit, the protection looks a lot like absence. And that's something I'm still learning how to live with. As the years went on, the days started to blur together in a way I didn't notice at first. Not because they were empty, but because they were predictable. Wake up, work, eat, sleep, repeat. There's a comfort in that rhythm, especially when you're telling yourself it's temporary. I kept saying that word, temporary, just for now, just until things settle, just until I'm more confident, more secure, less afraid of what could go wrong. Fear likes routines. It blends into them. In my 40s, people around me started changing. Some took chances I didn't understand. New careers, new cities, divorces, second marriages, late-night conversations about things they wanted but weren't sure they deserved. I listened. I nodded. I gave careful advice. And then I went back to my life exactly as it was. I told myself someone had to be the stable one. Someone had to stay put. I missed birthdays without meaning to. I missed dinners because I was tired. I missed chances to say something honest because I didn't want to complicate things. None of it felt dramatic in the moment. That's the part no one warns you about. Regret doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly disguised as another reasonable excuse. There was a woman I loved once. I don't say that lightly. I loved her in the way you love someone when you're still trying to be careful with yourself. I never told her everything, not because I didn't care, but because I was afraid of changing what we already had, afraid of rejection, afraid of being exposed, afraid that wanting more would somehow ruin us. So I waited, and she waited too for a while. Then she stopped. When she left, it wasn't sudden. It was polite, gentle even. She said she felt like she was standing still next to me watching time move on without us. I remember nodding as if I understood. I told her I respected her decision. I told myself I'd done the mature thing by not chasing her, by not begging, by not saying things that felt risky. That night I sat alone and felt something unfamiliar. Not heartbreak, emptiness, a dull awareness that something important had passed without a fight. Life kept moving. It always does. I married later. I worked longer hours. I became known as someone dependable, someone calm, someone who didn't make waves. People trusted me, and I thought that meant I was doing something right. But slowly, conversations became shorter. Friendships thinned, not because of conflict, but because of neglect. I didn't call enough. I didn't show up fully. I told myself everyone was busy, that this was just how adulthood worked. By the time I noticed the silence, it had already settled in. Fear didn't attack my life all at once. It just kept convincing me there was no urgency, and I believed it. The turning point didn't come with a grand realization. It came on an ordinary afternoon, the kind I'd lived through thousands of times before. I was in a hospital waiting room, staring at a wall that had been painted a color meant to be calming. My wife was inside being examined. We had driven there quietly, no music, no small talk, just the sound of the road and the familiar weight of things left unsaid. When the doctor came out, he didn't look rushed. That's how I knew something had changed. He spoke plainly, carefully, used words that don't leave much room for hope, but enough to avoid panic. We nodded, asked a few questions, took notes we never looked at again. On the way home, my wife reached for my hand. It surprised me, not because we were distant, but because touch had become practical between us. Habitual. This was different. She squeezed my hand like she was trying to remind me she was still there. That night I lay awake and felt time pressing in a way I never had before, not rushing, just closing. I started replaying moments I'd dismissed, things I'd postponed, conversations I'd softened until they meant almost nothing. I realized I had spent my life managing risk instead of choosing meaning. My wife died 2 years later. I won't dramatize it. There was sadness. There was pain, but what stayed with me wasn't the grief. It was the clarity. After she was gone, there was nothing left to protect, no one left to disappoint, and suddenly The fear that had guided so many of my choices had nowhere to hide. I saw how often I'd chosen silence over honesty, safety over connection, control over presence, not because I didn't care, but because I cared too much about the wrong things. There are losses you can recover from, and then there are losses that simply become part of you. You don't heal from them. You learn how to carry them without letting them harden you completely. Now, most of the people who knew me in my prime are gone. The world has moved on. I walk slower. I listen more. And I think about how strange it is that fear felt so important when I had so much time and feels so small now that I don't. If I speak directly to you now, it's not to warn or instruct. I don't believe in that anymore. I can only tell you what I see from here. Fear is quiet. It sounds like reason. It wears patience like a virtue. And by the time you realize what it's taken, you're already at the end counting what's left instead of what you could have lived. I don't have many days ahead of me. I know that. I don't say it sadly, just honestly. If there's anything left for me, it's to sit with this truth and let it be known. Some things don't need fixing. They need acknowledging.